Good morning. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation, more than anything. Despite my bumpy ride in yesterday, I actually got to join the award ceremony last night, and I don't know about those of you who were there or saw it, it was very touching, as Chris also said, to see some of the change that is actually taking place, but at the same time, we sit back sometimes with the feelings like, why don't we do more? I mean, there's so much more to be done, even if to just draw on the examples that we saw yesterday. I mean, that could be done elsewhere, but we don't. And often it has to do with uncertainty and not knowing where the world is going and when should we actually respond. And so today, for the next 25 minutes or so, I'll talk about uncertainty and what we do with it. I come from Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, and I very often start with a logo. Not for product placement, but to underline that future is a plural. In Danish, we're called something else. We've been around for 55 years doing this, and one of the ways you do future for 55 years is that you never say anything for certain. So I won't do that. But when we translated ourselves into English, we made a point of saying the futures are multiple, which is why it's not just one future, but futures. So if you leave with anything after my talk, is that you never plan for just one future only. Somewhere in this picture, you may find me. You should be able to find me, except I couldn't actually find myself when I saw this. But we're going back in time. And I know I was supposed to talk about the future, but a good way to warm up our mental flexibility and our time perception is to do a little bit of time travel backwards. I was born in Soviet Union. So on the other side of the Iron Curtain, and this is on the border to China, in Kazakhstan, the former capital. And this is a first day of school, and we're back in 1989 now. I'll stop you from looking. This is me. And we always started September 1st. So this is a parade picture. There's always that one kid who forgot it's picture day. My classmate to the right, she's wearing her black uniform rather than the white. That never changes. But So I was born into a world in '81 where, there were 2 blocks. They were explained to us thoroughly. Part of my school system was that I had to learn every capital in the world by heart. And then in my heart, I knew that I would likely not visit most of them. And that was okay. I mean, I know we remember the Cold War something bad, and we should, but as a kid, you just experience this linear projection of a future and say, well, I kind of know where the world is going. So this is September '89. The problem is that the same year, 2 months later, the world changed, right? And it changed for the better. The wall collapsed. We reunified Europe, Berlin, Germany, and basically the globe, because suddenly the Cold War was ending. And that was just 2 months after this picture was taken. So not in a million years would any of us have thought, felt, or the teachers, the grown-ups, no one when this was happening, was actually looking at a complete collapse of the world systems. And this changed for the better. The problem is, as was also said in the introduction, I've spent a good part of my life, I'm a trained economist, so I've spent a lot of time working with linear models and risk, and people often ask me, with your risk background and your futurist background, what are the biggest risks in the next 10 years to the world? And they expect me to say something like, political collapse, or geopolitics, or armed conflict, or the rest of it. I actually think that the biggest risk we have is failure of imagination. And the reason I say that is because 6 months before this picture was taken, a young man lost his life trying to cross the Berlin Wall. There's just no way, even 7 months or 9 months before this huge change happened, in February that same year, a young man, 20 years old, called Chris, he tried to cross the Berlin Wall and was shot as the last one to die that way. Had we been able to imagine a different future, he may still be here. Had we been able to talk about what if, he may still be here. So I think failure of imagination, especially at a time like now, where everything looks a little bit gloomy, and we look at climate change, and again, geopolitical conflicts, and the world splitting in 2 again, and all of that. If we project all that into the future in a linear way, we may make the same mistake. So I think the failure of imagination may be the biggest crisis that we have. So let's not do that. I think the best way to introduce that whole theme is by this piece of art, and it's in a museum somewhere. And if you don't believe me already that the future may be very different from what you think right now, then again, let's just revisit the past a little bit. Let's go back 5, 10 years. I'm seeing a lot of young people in the room, so let's not go back too far. Let's go back 5 years. And just 5 years ago, try and ask yourself 2 questions. The first one being, what did you think about 2024 that didn't happen? And then the second one is, if you look around in 2024, what is here that you didn't expect back when you were 5 years ago? Right? And you already get this range of futures, and this is just 5 years, right? You thought something would happen, it didn't, and you find yourself in a set of circumstances that you didn't foresee. Now, of course, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to step into 24 and say, I wonder how many of those same mistakes we're making 10 years ahead. So when we look into 34, what are we already thinking we're sure of or take for granted or plan towards that may never occur? And what is it we're missing that may come as a surprise when we're standing 10 years from now and repeating this exercise? So let's not our imaginations be the biggest risk that we have, because I just proved to you that the future will be significantly different from what any of us can imagine if we just do it based on a linear thinking. The thing with the future is that it's always important. And I've never been in a room, not in my former life as an economist in the big corporate sector, where I would sit with some of our senior managers or the board even, and not in a single room would I experience that people say, let's not do future, it doesn't matter. The future is always important. The problem is, it's never urgent, right? And it shares that characteristic with something else, say the climate problem. We can all agree that it's extremely important, but it's not really urgent, not the way we treat it. And the same goes for the future. So we always get to the future sometime down later in the meeting, or we need to discuss the daily business and the operations and what's happening here and now, and then finally we look at the agenda and go like, we're also supposed to talk about 10 years from now. And go like, we got 5 minutes left, let's do it later. Right? It's a bit like that kid brain puzzle where if you're running a race and you overtake the second person in the race, what number are you then? Well, you're still second. And that keeps happening to the future and long-term thinking. So what we do where I work now and what we do when we work with the future is we need to move our way of thinking from the what now, this reactive, responsive kind of, we need to respond to something that is already happening, unfolding, what do we do, to the what if. So we need to start imagining things way ahead of time, because first of all, that's the only way we can shape the future, right? We need to paint a different picture. And mind you, we're probably the only creature on this planet, as far as we know, that can imagine something we have never seen. Then I can convey it to somebody else. It could be verbally or, images, whatever it is. And I can convey it so convincingly that someone else can see it too. And none of us have ever seen it, but we can now imagine it. And mind you, the future is just a story we tell each other. It hasn't happened. No one knows. But the person or the group or the entities with the most compelling images or the most verbal persuasions of what the future should be like, they will be the ones who are actually going to paint it. So why not be one of those groups, and why not be one of those agents for change? Because the future will happen eventually, no matter what we do. So it can happen to us, or it can happen with us. And I'm not going to tell you that each and every one of us can basically, the butterfly effect, we can change the world. But actually, in a way, we can. Because someone is already having these ideas, and if you don't agree with them, well, then make your own. And then convince somebody. And then turn the future into something that you would like it to be. So how do you then work with the future? Because it all sounds very ambiguous, and I appreciate that, because as I said, I met the Institute when I was on the customer side, so I sat in a global conglomerate, and we were working with shipping and oil, and we had these long-term assets, but we didn't really know where the future was going, and we didn't know what to do with it. So we needed a structure, and the structure is the following. The easiest thing you can do is start with the megatrends. And by definition, these are tectonic plates. Think of them a bit like glaciers. They move very slowly but surely, and they're going to remove everything on their way. So they're on their way for about 10 to 15 years. Non-negotiable forces. They will impact us globally. They will impact all of us, not the same time, not with the same magnitude. And very often I also get challenged, like, but they're imperfect and they're correlated, and yes, they are. But you can say the same about the Sustainable Development Goals. And the reason I make that comparison is because when I joined my former employer, who was a big shipping company, the biggest in the world at that time, I was still doing my thesis, and I was writing my thesis in the evenings, young, ambitious. I had to do full-time work and then write my thesis at night. And I was writing about climate change. So I was trying to solve climate change with a mathematical model. And one evening, one of my very senior colleagues came to me and he said, hey, what is it you do night after night? And I said, oh, no, climate change, mathematics. He said, climate change. This is where the ice is going to melt and there's going to be more water for us to sail on. And I was like, yeah. I mean, we also have ports, but disregarding that, that's one interpretation for sure. And it doesn't mean they were bad people. I mean, I still have a big heart, a big place in my heart for my former employer. But we didn't know what to do with sustainability. We had this one person who was part sustainability, part legal, something. And this is in 2008. This is not last century. We were just discovering that oil could be bad for the atmosphere. Right? So we didn't know. And then suddenly you get the Sustainable Development Goals and everyone can work with sustainability. You get this finite number, nice little boxes, pictograms, colors. You know, some of the bigger companies would have them in their receptions in these big cubes. You can sit on them, you can interact, or you put in your annual report, say, we just changed the dishwasher in the canteen, which means we're solving SDG related to water, whatever it is. Suddenly you went from being ambiguous and difficult to being a finite number of things you need to consider. And now we can work with sustainability. The same goes for the megatrends. Because if we're honest, we don't think all 17 SDGs are equally important. I yet have to meet someone who hasn't worked in developing them who can remember all 17. We treat them differently, we invest in them differently, we talk about them differently, we can't mention half, but at least we can work with them. So the same plea goes for the megatrends. They will be unequal, they will be correlated, they will impact at different times, different magnitude across the globe, but now you can work with them. Then you can say, well, 10, 15 years is a very long time, so what happens in the meantime? And when we updated our megatrends just a few years ago, we actually kept globalization as a megatrend. And it's because if you look in economic terms, it's flow of goods, people, and finance, and that's still growing, so globalization continues. But underneath, we now know we can't talk about economics or geopolitics without talking about decoupling, deglobalization, the world splitting in half. So that is the one megatrend that is probably the most challenged. That's where we have the uncertainties. So uncertainties are these are trends and dynamics that are pushing and pulling the megatrends in and out of their trajectories on a daily basis, keep challenging them. And at some point they get so forceful that they can actually change a megatrend, and then we have to revise them. And then we have the unexpected events, also made popular by Taleb, calling them the black swans. And there is a reason why swan is transparent. I believe they need to be defended a little bit. I think we're beginning to confuse the black swan with a completely different creature, a different species, which is a scapegoat, because we simply fail to see things in time. But I'll get back to that. But before we have all that, we have our cognitive biases, and I think I would like to take a little time to actually dive into those. So what are our biases? And here I don't mean the unconscious bias, gender and the biases we talk about on a daily basis, but these are the ones we don't talk about. But they impact the way we plan, strategize, invest, and this is no matter how senior, how junior, how experienced, etc. you are, we all have them once in a while, and it really derails our thinking. So let's do the first one. So the first one is the status quo bias, and it basically means that we respond emotionally to change. We think it's bad for business, something is changing, we intuitively go, this is not comfortable, and I don't know if it's back to our, primate brains, because I'm not a biologist, that, change means adaptation means you need to spend energy, and we don't want to spend energy. So regardless, when things are changing, things are different, uncertainty occurs, we respond with a little bit of a paralysis. We sit down and we say, everybody, sit tight. This is going to go away. The status quo will come back. Things will be just as they used to, just nobody move. Right? So we waste a little bit of time because this is where the opportunities arise. Right? Things are changing. We get new challenges. That means we get new solutions, etc. But we just sit there and go, this is uncomfortable. We do nothing. Then at some point, enough has changed, and we call in our team and we say, guys, we need to do something. This is not going away. And what we do is we go straight for the confirmation bias and say, when in doubt, let's do what we know. Let's do something that used to work. It may have worked in a completely different set of circumstances, but why not try it again? And of course it doesn't. So we waste a little bit more time. In the meantime, we're either exposed to risks, or we forgo opportunities taken by our competition, or whatever it is. Time is wasted. The next bias is extremely important. It's a very positive bias, actually, because this is where you get the crazy ideas, the entrepreneurs, the innovators, these trailblazers, but it's also one where we do have pitfalls, so it's the optimism bias. And it basically means this idea is so great, it cannot possibly fail. And God knows a lot of technology is resting at the bottom of this ocean, but it doesn't have to be a physical thing, right? It can be, now I come from Copenhagen, and I love my city. I really, really do. Actually, if anyone would link with me on Instagram, you'd see I pay tribute to it once in a while. But we also have areas that someone thought would be a great idea to build and develop that are just dead residential areas, right? So something was missing. We just thought the idea was so great it couldn't possibly fail. It could be building your next headquarters somewhere where no one wants to go. It could be a talent program like the one I developed for my team, thinking I was still young and I could relate. I developed a whole talent program to realize that none of my young colleagues were interested. But I fell in love with the idea so much that I spent time planning, executing, rolling it out, only to realize that there were no takers. The next one is for the experts. I used to be an expert, so I used to be an economist. Now I'm a flexpert, which is a nice name for a generalist, but this is the expert problem. And this basically says that experts don't know what they don't know. And not in this Donald Rumsfeld kind of unknown unknowns way, but more in the experts. Who are experts really, if you think about it? So experts are people who have spent and dedicated a big portion of their life to getting to know more and more about less and less, right? They specialize, they zoom in. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever tried playing penguin football. It's basically where you get a cone on your head and you try to navigate a football court or football pitch. We zoom in, and that means experts would often not propose a solution to something that is just outside their field of expertise. And I'll give you an example. I don't know if it's true, but rumor has it that the engineers at NASA, so the space organization, were tasked with developing a pen that would work in zero gravity. Right? So, they put all their great minds to it, engineers, all their knowledge, the budget. And then at some point, someone comes by and says, why don't you just use a pencil? Right? So an engineer will be looking for a solution within engineering. Someone with a financial background will give you financial instruments. A biologist would do the same within whatever they knew. So they're going to look in their toolbox, and they're going to get to work. And I'm not saying don't use experts. By all means, of course, do, because they really, really know what they're talking about. But again, they know this. So be sure to ask different people, and this is what gets me to this one. So the confirmation biases. The last one, it's usually greatly correlated with Friday afternoons and good weather. But this is about discussing something very, very complex. Something, say it is the future, something where no one actually knows, and you agree very quickly, and you come, whether it's consensus or consent, you don't actually know, but you just agree. And then you leave the meeting and you leave the office for the weekend with this nice feeling in your gut saying, that was great. I mean, we all saw it the same way. This must be the only true answer. You'd be wrong. Right? This would be this groupthink fallacy. So next time you discuss something very difficult and you all agree very quickly, you need to ask yourself, who's lying or who's missing? Sometimes it's both. And it doesn't have to be what field of expertise. Maybe it's someone who's just an expert at being young. I hate to say it, I've realized I'm not that group anymore. So who's not in the room? And there's a life hack we're introducing now to a lot of our collaborators. We're saying next time you have one of these meetings where you discuss long-term, leave an empty chair for the future. Just have an empty chair at your meeting table. And the next time you discuss something or you come to a solution or an agreement or a plan, just look at that empty chair and everybody go like, I wonder what the future would say. It's actually quite powerful. So those are the biases. What we'd then rather do is that we'd rather do future immediately, right? We need to remove these biases and go and open up our minds and start thinking. But what usually happens is if we come out to a big organization for their away day and they find a beautiful venue and it says, where are we in 10 years on the banner on the building, and everybody's future-minded. But then when we walk into the room, what people usually do, we don't show them this, is that they start discussing the present. Everybody goes straight to the left side of the triangle. Right? Something magical is happening there. We need to get it off our chests, all of this on our mind, the operations, the difficulties, the risks. And we spend a lot of time in the present. It's fine. Let's get it off. Let's offload, and then we can focus on the future. But then what happens after that is that they gravitate straight to the right side of the triangle. And we start discussing history and everything that worked, didn't work. Remember Paul in that other department, he suggested and it didn't. And then we have these long leases and partners. And I'm not going to tell you history doesn't matter, because it really does. It's culture, it's expertise, it's our values, but it's also a huge emotional and imagination anchor you drop in your head. And there's just no way we can be explorative after that, because we've done past, we've done present. Well, the future is going to be a linear projection. So next time you do this, start from the top. And let's do that now. So the best way to do this is try and imagine a kid, a child you know, your own, somebody else's. And then imagine that child have your age right now. And then just imagine one day in their lives. So they wake up in the morning. Where do they wake up? What do they wake up to? Do they own? Do they rent? Do they live in an apartment? In a house? In a city? Outside the city? What are the interest rates? Do they have kids of their own? Because if we look at the birth rates across the Northern Hemisphere, it's not a given. If they do, how many do they have? Who did they have them with? How many parents are involved? Is it just, maybe they just had them with themselves? At what age did they have these kids? What is their own physical and mental health at the time when they had their kids? Because fertility treatment is progressing. All right, what do they have for breakfast? Eventually they're going to have breakfast. What's on the breakfast table? Is it Kellogg's cornflakes? Because if it is, it means globalization continued. We have global brands. If it's some sort of cereal, what are they going to put on it? They're going to pour milk? Animal protein still? Is that where we are? Do we look back at industrial agriculture and go like, I can't believe we did that? Well, if kids are what they are today, you're going to throw away half that meal because they've changed their mind 11 times. You've got everything from toast to eggs lined up. You're going to throw away half, and then there's going to be a ticker in the wall that says, you just wasted 72 grams of cereal. Your carbon credit for the day is down. Your car will not unlock. But wait, do they have a car? Do they own a vehicle with room for 5 people so they can be stuck alone in traffic next to someone else with room for 5 people, alone? Do they need to go anywhere? Do they actually go physically to work, or do they just, go like this and a virtual space opens up? What fuels this vehicle, even if they have it? So did we manage the energy transition? Maybe all of that cereal just went straight into the car and like a DeLorean and go, great. If they do go to work, what do they do for work? Do they produce something? What is in use? What products are we buying? What services are we interacting with? If they're in public administration, then what's on the agenda? Is it that more and more people are turning 200 and it's great? More and more people are turning 200, but they've been unhealthy for the last 100 and it's a disaster for the health sector? Is it globalization still? Is it mental health? Is it housing? Is it the fact that back in 2024, we set in motion so many projects to build cities for the future, not knowing what the future would actually be like? We just extrapolated the present. What skill set do these kids need when they're adults to perform whatever it is they do for work? Because for the first time in human history, we don't know what to teach children. Right? Before, if you taught them how to hunt, they'd be fine. You taught them how to do agriculture, they'd be okay. Then industrial age, do something with your hands, great. Then get a degree, go to college, you'll be okay. Now we have no idea. Even just one generation ahead, we don't know what to teach them to make sure they'll be fine. So this is just one day in their lives. So unless you can place your idea, your vision for a city, your vision for a product, a service, whatever it is, if you can't place it in this one day, and imagine how people interact with it, and imagine who's going to be asking for it, purchasing it, well, then you need to start over. Because underneath this little science fiction story, I just gave you so many megatrend assumptions, right? It was urbanization, it was health, it was demographics, it was energy transition, it was geopolitics, it was food systems, right? So it may just have been a little science fiction episode, but it actually was a lot of hardcore methodological assumptions that you could have made differently if you were thinking of a different future. So do yourself a favor, start with the future first. And that was actually done for you here. So this is a lifestyle magazine snippet, and this is from 1950. Someone was tasked with imagining the world in the year 2000. And as you may quickly see, their imagination was quite extraordinary, right? There's something that looks like an iPad on the right, and this is 5 years after World War II, right? The world is in ruins. So there's an iPad, there's a flat screen TV in color in the privacy of a home. Somebody actually owned a TV. There's a microwave, and some of my young colleagues pointed out that we actually have a lot of commercial airlines in the air, which was also unthinkable. Wow, I mean, I could not imagine that. Then we have a helicopter on the roof, and then we have dad coming home from work. We have mom in the kitchen. We have grandpa smoking next to the kids, right? So all of the tech part is extremely fascinating. Wow. But everything, the social fabric, these softer elements, the dynamics of what happens in this household, that we can't imagine changing. But if you're a city planner at this point, you're not going to build an urban environment that caters for her to ever go to work. It's going to be shopping, school, medical care, whatever it is you need in an urban environment, that's all going to be built on the assumptions that the mom is going to stay home. Your highways will not be built for two adults going to work in separate directions. So while we're great at imagining technology, even when it's really difficult, the future is not tech. And I know now that AI is working its way through the world is the wrong time to say, but that's the reason we have industrial revolutions, because there's been 4 and they really make a difference. But in between, it's social change, it's dynamics between people, it's everything that happens in this house that changed the cities and the world. So I think I'll leave you with that. Multiple futures. Never go against a megatrend. You guys are in the business of long-term thinking. Leave that empty chair. And never again just focus on one future only. Thank you.